I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Redondo Beach Budget and Finance Committee for May 11th, 2023. Doug, can we do a formal roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Jesty?
Yes.
Commissioner Castle?
Here.
Chair Marin?
Here.
Commissioner Woodham?
Here.
Commissioner Samples?
Here.
Commissioner Sherbin?
Here.
Great, let's take a moment to salute the flag. Please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, move to approve the order of agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Moving to item E, blue folder items. Are there any blue folder items this evening?
No blue folder items.
Great. Moving to item F, consent calendar. Does anyone want to pull anything from the consent calendar at all, or move or discuss? Nothing. All right, can I get a motion to approve the posting for the regular Budget and Finance Commission meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Item G, doesn't seem like there's any excluded.
He's sort of rushing this through. And
I'm just trying to get to Eugene. I'm trying to get to our treasurer. His time is very valuable. Doesn't look like there's any excluded consent calendar items. Item H, public participation. I don't see any members of the public. Is there any e-comments or?
No e-comments, and there's nobody joining Zoom to make any comments.
Great. Then moving to item, do I have to formally close that one or no?
No, you
Okay.
can just move on to the next one.
All right. Appears to be no items continued from the previous agenda, so we'll move to item J. J1, City Treasurer's Q3 Fiscal Year 2022-2023 Report from Eugene Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Eugene Solomon, Redondo Beach City Treasurer, appearing before you tonight with Deputy City Treasurer Neelesh Mehta. A couple of opening remarks, if we may, please. This is our quarterly report to the commission. We have some presentations for you. We also have our financial advisory, Rick Phillips, on the Zoom with us. It's experiencing a little bit of difficulty, so Rick will be able to hear you and your questions and hear us, but not be able to see us. So please consider that when you're asking Rick a question. If you ask him some questions, there might be a little bit of a delay in a response. So kindly consider that. Each of you should have received in your emails today the monthly investment report for the City of Redondo Beach. So please let us know if you did not receive that. We sent that out to you. Was it today?
Yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yes.
So please look at that. As far as the report that you're about to go through, there are some changes that the commission has asked for in the past that we are in the process of implementing, such as a breakdown for our investment proceeds and the buckets that those proceeds will go into and the summaries that we have discussed at this commission previously. So appreciate your patience in awaiting those changes. They will be available probably by the next time we have one of our quarterly reports to you. So some of those things will be coming. I'd like to go ahead and thank you for the opportunity and hand the presentation tonight over to the Deputy City Treasurer, Neelesh Mehta.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Mr. Nick Sherbin, to the committee. I just wanted to make sure that you're up to date on our PowerPoint presentation and what we do on a quarterly basis. So I'll go a little slow. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Just wanted to see if Rick is able to hear us. I don't know. Doug, do you see Rick Phillips?
I see him on there. There he goes. He's on.
Hi, it's Rick. It's
Perfect. Okay.
It's Rick. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right. Thanks, Rick. So I'll just start off. Doug, can you go to the... So within our quarterly admin report, which is part of your packet today, we have the portfolio summary, the investment reporting guidelines, The investment report, which is created by FHN Main Street, run by Rick Phillips and his team, which includes the portfolio summary, investment policy compliance, investment activity report, and finally, the economic and market update. Within our PowerPoint presentation this evening, we have the investment reporting objectives and guidelines, policy compliance, quarterly performance, historical book value, cash flow analysis, monthly portfolio book yield, maturity distribution, trading activity, and finally, the fiscal impact to the city's general fund. Key investment objectives for municipal investing. The city treasurer maintains the city's cash flows while earning a competitive rate of return on the investments within the constraints of the city's investment policy and state law. One thing to keep in mind is safety, liquidity, and yield. That is the order in which we make our decisions. Safety is protecting the principal. Liquidity is providing necessary liquidity to cover ongoing and unexpected cash needs. And finally, the yield, which is to maximize earnings, recognizing the need for safety and liquidity, and making sure that we're abiding the state statutes and local government policies. Always remember that it's the community's money, not our money. So we have to act accordingly in a responsible stewardship capacity. And finally, it's investment manager's objective to earn a reasonable rate of return on the city's investments while preserving capital in the overall portfolio. It should never be the investment manager's goal to earn maximum returns on the city's portfolio, as it would expose the city to an unacceptable level of risk. Failures in public investing occur when policies are not clear, policies are inappropriate, policies are not followed, and oversight is inadequate. So here are some questions to ask yourself, as well as us. Do we review the investment policy? Do we understand the investment program? Do we receive the periodic investment reports? Are they clear, concise? Are they readable? And finally, do we understand them? So the next slide goes over the policy compliance for the quarter. On the left side, we have the different categories. And then at the bottom, we see the weighted average maturity, the liquidity, and the ratings. And on the right column is the key column, which measures whether we're in compliance with each of these. So as you can see, we are in compliance with each of these policies within our investment policy. The next slide goes over the comparisons between each of the quarters for the fiscal year.
Can I raise a question on the previous slide?
Yes.
We had talked about changes that you all were making, and Eugene mentioned that at the beginning. But I think there are a couple on this bottom that always concern me. The weighted average maturity, for instance, you show 1.97. Could you have FHN add the metric? What are we shooting for on that weighted average maturity? I think we have a maximum that we can go. So can you show on here what that metric is that we're dealing against? And the same way on ratings. You show that we're in compliance with the ratings, but I think there's an average maturity, an average rating for the portfolio, a guideline, and what we have. So it'd be helpful to have both of those on this report as well.
Okay, we will consider that with Rick.
So you'd like to know, Jerry, what the what our investment policy guideline is for our WAM for our weighted average maturity?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could weigh in on that also, we have the percent of portfolio and the percent allowed by policy, but there's nothing here that tells us that correlates directly back to exactly these items. It tells us what the yields actually are. The next slide talks about performance, but it doesn't correlate directly to the slide above. Can we kind of put that together in one place?
So you're interested in a yield by position?
Right. So treasuries versus federal agencies versus LAIF, and just to get a visual comparison of what are those performance metrics. Because, for instance, if We're allowed by policy to have 100% of our investment in treasuries, and that is significantly outperforming everything else. Why would we not be 100% in treasuries? That's an example. I don't expect you to answer that, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Okay, we'll have a discussion about that. Thank you.
So the following slide is a comparison quarter by quarter. Key point here, you'll see at the bottom, the lay field has been steadily increasing. 2.83% is the rate as of the end of the quarter. One thing to keep in mind is we have steadily been decreasing our lay field and transferring the money into a money market, and that money market is earning us approximately 4.5%. So considering that the lay field is lagging in its increases, we have gone ahead and transferred some of that assets into the money market, which maintains the same amount of liquidity while increasing the yield tremendously. If you look at the money market account, it's almost 13 million at the moment at the end of the third quarter, which is about 11% of our portfolio. We have 5 million in LAIF and 56, almost 57 million in federal agencies. Corporate medium-term notes, almost 9 million. Bank CDs, almost 1 million. And treasuries, almost 33 million. And then you'll see on the next slide, Doug, you'll see the comparison to last fiscal year at the same time. Third quarter, you'll see the lay field was 0.22. So just in about a year, we see a significant increase in the lay field, as well as the rate of return for the portfolio.
How is LAIF invested? I've seen this before, but I don't recall. And it's interesting how much their yield has improved. I'm glad that we're putting money into money markets instead, but I'm just curious about what LAIF invests in.
I would have to refer to Rick for that. Rick, would you be able to give us any details on LAIF?
Yes. It's primarily invested in treasuries and federal agencies. They do have some CDs that are collateralized. The reason that the yield lags on the way up, it has a lot longer weighted average maturity than a money market fund. For example, LAIF runs at about 300 days, so 3/4 of the year-ish, versus a money market fund, which runs at about 30 to 40 days. And so that's the difference. And when rates are falling, LAIF will have a yield that's higher than a money market fund for those types of reasons.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Doug, if you can go to the historical book value. Yes. So this is the historical book value by fiscal year, and it's broken down by month. So as you can see at the bottom, you'll see fiscal year 2023, March, you'll see 104.8 million, which is the highest point over the last 5 fiscal years at the end of March. So this just provides a little bit of history related to our portfolio and where it stands currently in comparison to the past. And this gives, the next slide, Doug, gives a graphical perspective of it. Going back to July 2009, you'll see where our portfolio was and where we currently stand. Just over 100 million. So the next slide, Doug, is our 2020 performance, just going back 2 fiscal years. And then the next slide, Doug, would be the cash flow analysis. Here we do a cash flow analysis. We have met the cash flow needs of the city for the quarter and expect to meet the expenditure requirements for the upcoming period. And that's one of the key tasks, duties of the treasurer's office. So,
And this is the cash flow analysis of the city's checking account?
correct.
Cash balance, yeah.
Okay.
The next slide, Doug, is the month-end portfolio book yield. So going back from April 2022, you'll see that the yield was just under 1.5%. In comparison, just a year, we're currently just above 2.5. We're actually at 2.55. So this gives you an idea about how much the portfolio has increased in its yield over the last fiscal year, or the last calendar year. Next slide, Doug. Maturity distribution. 37% of our maturities are within 0 and 1 year, and so on. We have 16% that are maturing between 1 and 2 years. This gives an idea about, how our portfolio is laddered, and as we identify better opportunities in the market, we're able to invest those funds that are maturing.
Question on this slide. The last column shows 4 to 5 year plus. Do we have maturities longer than 5 years, or is 5 years the max?
Rick, 5 is the max, yes. I believe 5 is the max.
5 is the max. That's just our standard report bucket there, because we do have clients that can go past 5 years, but for sure the city is hard 5 years and in.
Okay, thanks.
And Doug, can you do the trading activity? Okay, so this just gives you an idea about the historical trading activity going on within our portfolio. We had 3 purchases in the month of February, and for the quarter, we had 0 redemptions. So based on our cash flow needs, we make the decisions as needed throughout the fiscal year and take appropriate action. The final slide is the fiscal impact to the city. Interest earned year to date, almost $1.7 million. The general fund contribution rate is 60%. So approximately just over 1 million was contributed to the general fund through investment activity. At the beginning of the fiscal year, we had budgeted a contribution of 750,000 given the circumstances and the rate of return we were earning. So as you can see, we are on track to significantly exceed that budgeted amount. And that is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions for us or Rick, feel free. Yes.
So 2 things, just going through this, preparing for the meeting. Just given what's going on in the broader economy and with bank risk right now, I know most of our cash is at Bank of America. Is that something we are monitoring just in terms of their liquidity? And I know they're one of the larger banks, but we don't want to be the one with $15 million of cash at a Silicon Valley bank or something like that, because eventually I think the city would get their money back, but it would cause some operating issues for us. And along that same line, I noticed that the money market fund, I think we have about $11 or $12 million in I think it's called the All Spring Money Market Fund. In terms of monitoring that, in terms of security, because in the past, money market funds have locked up and, in financial crises. So is that something that we're monitoring?
Well, I'll let Rick address the position in Allspring for the money market, and then I can address the market risk when it comes to the banking. Mm-hmm. So Rick, if you wouldn't mind answering the question about Allspring, please.
Sure. Allspring's held in a separate custodial account. It invests only in treasuries and agencies, and so it's not tied to any bank. It's a separate custodial aspect. So if Allspring goes under, it doesn't matter. It's the city has first claim on those funds, and so that's how. And you're right that a few years ago, back in the great financial crisis, those were prime money market funds that locked up, that invest in corporate securities, commercial paper, CDs, and such. And so the SEC changed those rules to put gates on, and that's why California code, we don't invest in those kind of money market funds, only the treasuries and agencies that do not have those challenges that stay at a net asset value at $1.
Okay, thank you.
On a macroeconomic level, a lot of the weakness that we're seeing in the marketplace is with regional banks. Mm-hmm. What you're seeing is banks that suffered from mismanagement is maybe not the right word for it, but taking too much duration risk. Mm-hmm. An example of Silicon Valley Bank, or perhaps had too heavy, not a diversification of their portfolio of depositors, mm-hmm. where a big weight of their depositors were large depositors rather than a better disparity or diversity of depositors. Online banking has certainly impacted that, where there's a lot of activity where people can, in the blink of an eye, withdraw. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen a lot of the marketplace where some of the bigger banks are experiencing that. What you're seeing is weakness in the regional bank, SVB, Zions Bank, PacWest. What was it? I'm trying to remember the name of the bank. Republic, First Republic. First Republic. More regional, not a diversity of depositors. You saw what is our modern day version of a bank run.
Right.
Seeking money. So we haven't seen that in some of the larger banking institutions. The larger banking institutions are much better collateralized when it comes to something like that. So Bank of America, we have confidence in. U.S. Bank, where we have some funds, we have confidence in, not seeing that type of risk associated with our deposits.
Okay, thank you.
And Eugene, this is Rick. Can I add one additional insight to that too?
Of course, please.
So California code also stipulates that state and local government, well, the local governments here have to have collateral for bank accounts that are above the FDIC 250,000 limit. So obviously the city has many times that over. And so similar to like a money market fund, the Bank of America segregates the cash in the city's account and collateralizes that with treasuries agencies or a federal home loan bank letter of credit. So different than Silicon Valley Bank, and Roku had about $500 million there uninsured. We're not at risk at that because they did not have collateral backing those deposits that are segregated. And again, the city would have first claim on that collateral if Bank of America went under.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And also, I'm going to address, if it's okay, there was a question or comment earlier, just looking at the different types or categories of investments. Do you guys have the packet, the agenda packet, and on page 32? Is that able to, can you guys get to there?
On 32 of the agenda packet?
Yeah, that's the BFC agenda packet, page 32, the PDF page 32. It's our monthly report.
It's
Portfolio
30,
summary?
it's page 32 in our packet.
Is
Yeah,
it the portfolio summary?
it is.
Okay, yeah, that's,
Okay, so if you see there, this is in each summary category, and if you look over to the right, you can see the percent of portfolio, but then also the weighted average book yield of CDs and treasuries. And so you can see how we're investing, what's comprising that, to look at what's generating the book yield to get to that weighted 2.55. And then as you go to the next few pages, you can look at individual securities by category that, treasuries, let's see, they're yielding 1.48. You could see a couple pages later, all the treasuries that comprise that book yield. So that's where we give the detail. Neil was showing the picture version up front, but then we get into all the details and the metrics so you can really drill down and x-ray the portfolio.
Very good. So we've got this, I guess, in two different places. And when your eyeballs are moving back and forth, sometimes you don't see things. Thank you so much.
There's a lot of details in this report. I totally understand. And I look at this all the time, and you look at it, periodically. So I get that.
Any other questions?
I have one other question for our new treasurer, just to put him on the spot just a little bit. Getting all the way down to the contribution this year, your last slide, if I can find it again. There are a lot of slides here.
The final slide, the fiscal impact slide?
Right, fiscal impact
Yeah.
summary. So I understand we're in some volatile times and it gets difficult to forecast the future. But this forecast was off by only about 50 or 60%. Since we're in the time of creating budgets and funding projects for the coming year, is there any sense how accurate the forecast will be for next year in this budget contribution?
Well, I'd say that if you could predict interest rates, you'd be a very wealthy man. So no one can predict interest rates. and you should be wary of anyone who tells you that they can. I would say that our projections are based upon the current portfolio mix and those and what we're seeing in the marketplace right now in real time. So we couldn't have predicted what the Fed's actions were going to be over the past 15 months, raising interest rates 500 basis points. And the market might think one thing and the Fed thinks another. Oftentimes the Fed says one thing and then does another. So projections are just that. They are projections.
So the answer is you have no idea whether you're going to be better or not.
Can I provide some insight, City Treasurer?
Yes, please do.
So for fiscal impact, and hi, Rick, on the phone, this is Wendy Colazzo, the new finance director. To give you an idea of fiscal impact that you're asking in the question, and Rick, I'm going to kind of have you echo a little bit some of this. I think what you want is not, can we project, right? Projections are just as accurate to the nut as we can get, right? But I think it'll be more important that Rick brings up what's economically happening. For this commission, if you reference 1984, okay, inflation rate was at 14%. Why, right? The reason is because the more people spend spendable income, the higher the interest rates because the government's trying to stop you from spending that income, right? So right now, 750 was the estimated budget performance for 22-23. We've ranked it up based on Neil and the city treasurer's approval. 23-24 represent $1.2 million that were projected. The inverse of that is the unrealized gains. That's the expenditure, which has been coming high, right? You know, as we either mature something a lot sooner than it's intended, we have losses, hopefully gains, right? The market and its diversity is the big equation between weighted average. You're at 1.97. That's the average for a municipality, with 5 years is your longest term because you don't have any long-term mortgages and things of that nature. So I will say we'll stay probably very consistent to potentially hit 1.2, right? But remember, the inverse in the expenditure side is any unrealized gains, the net effect of that. And I think the city manager will bring that up through budget, but I wanted to make you kind of aware of that net effect for you, right? And then just remember, like I said, 1984 reference, we made it out of that. So I'm sure we're going to make it out in 2023. And then Rick can kind of probably provide a little bit more to that as far as economics and our diversity and what we and the treasurer would like to do to diversify even longer, right? Because to your question, Commissioner Samples, you asked, why not go 100% towards federal, right? They're giving us the best return because I think you always have to reference your city policy is that we're diversified and it's the people's money, right? And we got to make the best return just to hold us and run the business.
Well, as I said in that comment earlier, that was just for the sake of discussion in order to get an idea of what that chart was telling us and be able to get a view of it. My question here was really, obviously, we did very well this year. The city has an extra $250,000 to spend that we weren't forecasting as revenue from our investments. And as the city goes from year to year, trying to forecast what we can afford, what we can't afford, what things need to be done, capital improvements and so forth, the tighter we can make these forecasts, the better off we are. And there is a range, okay? I don't expect it to be dead on. I was just curious.
One comment or thought. The increase in interest rates in 2022 was the Fed increased rates more and they increased them faster than they ever have in history. So to your point, Mel, it would have taken a clairvoyant to have predicted that increase in rates. The second part of the question was, going forward, can we be more accurate? And I think it's reasonable that rates are not going to decrease or increase as much in the future as they have last year. So the Fed funds rate went from 0 to about 5. And as long as inflation stays where it is or close to where it is, the Fed funds rate is going to stay close to 5. So there's even in the wildest dreams of a forecaster, there's nothing in the rates for the next year or two that would be as substantial as that rate increase, either up or down.
Right.
So whatever forecast we come up with for interest earnings for this coming year, by its very nature, is going to be more accurate than what we saw in the last 12 months.
Fair enough.
Rick, did you want to
It's
please
Rick.
add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to add some specificity of the the clairvoyance of the Fed and the market, and we are very tied to the Fed being 5 years in, with the bulk of the portfolio really 3 years in. That's so correlated to Fed funds, and like was mentioned, just the highest increase and fastest ever. But the Fed and the market through the Fed funds futures, they were forecasting at the beginning of 22 that we would end the year of Fed funds at 1%. 1%, going from 0 to 1. And obviously we went to 5 almost by the end of last year. Now what's interesting is the Fed, in their Fed dots, where they're projecting out the end of each year for the next 3 years. But let's just take this year first. They're projecting that they stay at 5.25. The market right now, with all that's going on, is saying you're going to cut 3 25 basis point cuts, so down 0.75%. And then the Fed actually has planned to cut 1% next year, but the market's saying you're going to cut 2% next year. So we'll see who wins out. They're both wrong most of the time. And so what's nice about the portfolio in the sense that we buy and hold most securities, and we do have some laddered out past the end of next fiscal year that we'll just get to earn whatever those securities are, and you can look in the portfolio what they are. And so what the hardest part of the forecast is things that are maturing and new money coming in. And we're really hoping that the Fed never goes down to 0 again, and maybe the next recession they go to 2. And who knows when that will be. But that's the challenge. The last 4 years have been the most challenging in my time of forecasting, with trillions of dollars of stimulus, Fed hiking faster than ever. And so, it's been a tough crystal ball lately, but we do feel confident, as confident as we can, that the interest rates will be more stable next fiscal year. So I think our budget forecast, or the forecast, will be much tighter, but we shall see.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other comment? I don't see any public comments, anything, e-comments or any on Zoom?
There's no public comments.
Great. Motion to close item J1.
I move that we close item J1.
Second.
Take a roll call vote.
Sure. Commissioner Jesse?
Aye.
Commissioner Castle?
Aye.
Chair Marin?
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham?
Aye.
Commissioner Samples?
Aye.
Commissioner Sherbin?
Aye.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, members of the commission. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Same here. Moving on to item J2, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2023-2024 proposed budget and fiscal year 2023-2028 proposed 5-year capital improvement program.
Good evening to the council again. Wendy Colazzo, Finance Director. The city manager is on his way. I just alerted him that their city treasurer was completing his presentation. And I'll just preamp him until he takes his seat. But he'll be here to address the commission as he enters right now in perfect timing.
Excellent.
To get any of your recommendations and or areas of focus that you'd like him to have for the 23-24. So I will give our city manager the floor.
Thank you.
Evening.
Hey, good to see
How
you.
we doing? Great. Good to see you all again. I feel like it's been a few months, so happy to be here. For those who I don't know, Mike Witsanski, City Manager. It's that time of year where I'm seeking your preliminary input towards the preparation of our proposed 23-24 fiscal year budget. I don't have facts and figures to present to you this evening. This is really just our dialogue and an opportunity to talk about ideas that you think we as staff should be contemplating as we package up our budget and consider how to make our proposal. You'll get another opportunity, as you knew, once the budget is presented, to provide to review that with us, Wendy and I, and then ultimately to give some counsel to the city council as they begin their deliberations. So, in fact, I think it might not just be one meeting, it might be 2 when you consider your joint meetings later on. So tonight's really an opportunity for me to listen and get your thoughts as we go into this fiscal year cycle and go from there. I will tell you, as Wendy and I are digging into the details and getting closer to a better understanding of where we're at from a structural revenue and operating expenditure standpoint, we are trending about where we thought we would. The big concern that we continue to have on the revenue side remains for yet another year, unfortunately, the performance of the Marine Avenue Hotel site, which I've shared with this commission in the past. Typically, those 3 hotels generate about $1 million a year in transient occupancy tax for us. They are not currently doing that because under our site-specific tax pledge and our leaseback arrangement, are required or are allowed to funnel roughly $3 million into an authority-funded reserve that delays our receipt of transient occupancy tax. They're still replenishing that reserve, in part because they are making significant property repairs that they were apparently obligated to perform by their corporate partners, their corporate hotel banners. So we're a little bit distressed by that, candidly. In fact, I've asked our treasurer to work with Wendy to dig into the status of the funds and better understand what it is that's causing this delay. So we're a little disappointed that we're not seeing revenue begin to accrue this fiscal year, but the current projections show that we won't see TOT from that site until likely the 24-25 fiscal year. So had we had that this fiscal year, as we had hoped originally, we would be structurally balanced. But without it, I think we're going to be short. I can't give you the exact number yet. You'll see it Tuesday when we present the budget to the council. But I think we are going to be a little underwater as we wait for those Marine Avenue sites to come online again from a TOT standpoint. So, but aside from that, general fund revenues tend to continue to kind of trickle upwards. And property tax continues to be solid. We've had some surprising lift in the utility user tax component. Eugene and Nilesh have been looking at that for us a little bit. We think in part this year in particular was a big year, and that was, I think, largely due to the spike in gas prices and some of the other utilities that we experienced. We'll see, I think, some of that flatten out next year and stabilize, but all utility costs across the board have gone up and will sustainably, I think, be up into the next fiscal year and will allow us to achieve some additional revenue there. Historically, UUT was coming in at a little under $7 million a year, and it was just sort of flat or trending downward. In the last couple of years, it's popped up, and we're going to actually be proposing about $8.5 million of anticipated revenue in UUT this year. So that was a nice bright spot. Property tax, about every year, we're seeing another $1.5 million year over year on an increased basis. New tax increment continues to be positive for us. Sales tax has flattened off a little bit after a big pickup post-pandemic. We're going to have that come in at about $11.5 million, I think, in our projections. So revenues on the facility side, user pay programs and recreation and the like are getting stronger and stronger as participation continues to build in those programs. So we're seeing some positives there. But all in all, proposed revenues, core revenues year over year are going to be up from where they were last year, which is a good thing. And that's it, despite, as I mentioned, the Marine Avenue Hotel site still being offline. Separately, as we prepare this budget, we're thinking about the out years, bringing ourselves into full structural balance. I do expect to see money from the Legato Hotel renovation down on PCH and PV Drive to probably kick in for us sometime in 24-25, not next fiscal year, but likely the year after. We'll see some additional increased property tax revenues from that site once it gets operational. And then we are anticipating, not next fiscal year, but again in 24-25, to see some significant sales tax generated by the cannabis licenses that we anticipate issuing next fiscal year and will likely be built out and operating in the 24-25 fiscal year. Estimates we think could easily be $1 million a year between the two locations and maybe more, based on the fact that right now we appear to be the only community that has embraced cannabis license installations in the South Bay. So those are some good, I think, some horizon type issues that are positive for us. But we're really focused on core expenses, core capital resources this fiscal year. What you'll see in the proposed budget, I think, will be positions and funds that are meant to address issues that have been raised by the community and the city council over the last several months, and really linked to resource allocation, and I think are viewed as priority. This is not going to be a year like last year where we had so many one-time initiatives and we had all those leftover residual proceeds from the pension refinancing that we completed. You know, we had an extra $10-12 million in available fund balance, and the council initiated a lot of small projects that we're still working our way through. You won't see that proposal in the budget this year. This is going to be a more kind of apple pie and sort of basic program. But that said, we do have some increased expenditure pressures in the area of our own utility costs. We have certainly, we've approved cost of living adjustments for our Police Officers Association. We have planned cost of living adjustments for our Fire Association that come online in July. And as I've shared with this commission in the past, I personally want to see us continue to make an investment in our existing labor force, and what's remaining in that is the miscellaneous employees, our other 4 bargaining groups. So we really, you'll probably see something from us in the budget that sets some money aside for those negotiations. That's not too specific to where we kind of erode our negotiating position, but something to say to council, look, don't forget about the fact that we need to invest structural money in this area, and that we don't want to necessarily spend it on other things absent that. So, you know, that's kind of about as much of a preview as I can give you right now. It's not fully baked yet. Poor Wendy, thank God she's sticking with us here, is really knee deep in all of this right now. And every day we're talking and pivoting based on most recent information. And we'll have the budget packaged and proposed to council next Tuesday night. There'll be an item in the city council agenda that will be a bit of a cover item, an admin report that says the budget's coming, but they won't see it, and it won't be available to the community until late afternoon next Tuesday, which is the day, as this commission knows, that by charter I'm responsible to present the budget to the council. So that said, any ideas you have that you'd want to share with me or have us be thinking about, I'm all ears.
Question, Mike.
Yeah.
Two-part question. First, what can you tell us about total revenue and how that looks now compared to last year? And then added on to that, you mentioned structural balance. Explain what you mean by the budget being in structural balance or out of balance. Yeah,
I always deliver to the council a balanced budget, right? By charter, I have an obligation to do that. All municipalities do. But when I speak to structural balance, I'm really focused on sustainable revenues versus ongoing expenditures, right? So I look at our core taxes, I look at property tax, UUT, sales tax, DOT, and I say, okay, when you add all that up and our normal charges for service, we're gonna see probably $104 million of revenue next year. You know, I'm just ballparking right now. And then I add up all of our core expenditures, you know, our 440 full-time employees, all the part-timers that are necessary to run all of our different operations, all the maintenance and operations budget that we need to perform core day-to-day services, all the transfers out for the funds, pension bond payments, you know, payments to PERS for active benefits for employees, et cetera. All of those charges rolled into what I call structural expenditures or ongoing expenditures. That number is going to be in the $105 million range, right? So when I feel like we're in structural balance, I can safely say our core ongoing revenues are equal to or greater than our core ongoing expenditures. Every year, as you know, we have one-time appropriations in the budget that are, I don't flash in the pans too gimmicky a word, but are truly short-term in nature, right? We might set a bunch of money aside to deal with a real estate issue. We might set one-time funds aside to support a specific capital effort or supplement an existing program budget for a single year. We might trial a particular part-time staffing model in the police department or the Recreation Community Services Department. And those, in my view, aren't core. Those are temporary, right? So There's always a series of those in every budget, and we usually prop up and pay for those types of activities with reserves or fund balance or some other one-time discretionary resource. So when I use that term structural, that's kind of what I mean. I mean, at the end of the day, we're certainly going to propose a balanced budget. I have every confidence based on the numbers I've seen today, we'll be able to do that. Will we need to eat into our available fund balance that's unallocated right now? Will we need to use, as I've said to you all in the past few months, will we need to bridge that gap for balancing the structural revenues and expenditures using some of that set aside money we talked about when we did year-end designations? Yes, I think we'll probably need to draw from those funds, those one-time resources to be balanced. But I do feel optimistic about our ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures if we look at it more than 1 year out as a bit of a forecast.
Okay, thanks.
That was one of the issues I think that sort of came up at our last meeting. And I was looking at the budget, the original budget for this year, and there was the proposed budget, and then there was the budget with the city manager's adjustments.
Yes.
And the city manager's adjustments had expenses at about $13 million more than revenue.
That was the adopted budget after council's appropriations. Yeah, they ended up, we had so many, that was that big one-time source of funds that we had. We had all that residual money from really two things, the pension obligation bond, refinancing that we didn't have to write quite the check that we expected to have to write to PERS. So that left us with a bunch of spending money.
Right.
And then we had an additional tranche of ARPA monies, the American Reinvestment Act funding that federal government doled out to kind of offset impacts of COVID. And we had that tranche of money available as well. So the council, we did a lot of one-time spending with last year's budget.
Okay.
And a big chunk of that 13 million that you're referring to was for capital allocations.
Okay.
And so that I would call one-time appropriation. So this year you'll see a more traditional budget because we just don't have that
Right, okay.
play money, if you will.
Right. And then I
that
guess
surplus.
in terms of timing from when it came in to when it was actually spent. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
have the priorities for the capital projects been finalized for the 23-24 year?
We, not yet. I mean, we're proposing and packaging that up for the council next Tuesday. We've done our internal review. We've tried to be sensitive to things we've heard from this commission and others and the council over the last several months to anticipate the priorities of the community. We have fairly limited funds to spend this year. We have the $1 million of general fund money we set aside with year-end designations. That's the primary source of the discretionary spending. We continue to have our annualized local return monies for our like Proposition A, Proposition C, state gas tax, Measure M, Measure W, these different, Measure R, these different sales tax provisions that have been adopted by the county or the state over the years that provide for us local return for capital investment. Exclusively, those dollars are used for roadway projects, streets, sidewalks, traffic signals, et cetera. So we've got that pot of money to spend, but really on the discretionary side, the truly discretionary side, about $1 million. And we've got some pretty clear needs there. I mean, you know, we could, if you gave us $100 million to spend, we probably could still find another $100 million of worth of things to do that we couldn't afford with it. So,
Well, we did not have a chance to really review the priorities, so we could not provide the input for what really needs to be done and how much money can we allocate for it.
yeah. So what you'll get, so tonight, if you've got particular capital items that you think we should prioritize, I'm all ears tonight. That's not been cooked and baked in stone. But what you'll have an opportunity to do is after you see the proposed capital budget come out next Tuesday, you'll be able to look at how I'm proposing to allocate those resources. And this commission can, you know, will weigh in, roll up its sleeves and decide, hey, do I think this budget looks right? Do we want to maybe suggest that the council redirect some of these resources? So you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on a more granular basis. This sequence is about you just giving me some ideas to think about before the budget gets presented.
Okay.
You'll be able to react to the budget and then provide some counsel to the city council after it's come out.
And secondly, many states or even cities are taking advantage of the huge amount that the government has offered to incentivize bringing manufacturing back, and also for the infrastructure, alternative energy projects. Is the city looking at anything or any business in the city considering expansion, which will eventually benefit the city too?
Yeah, we have a strategic plan item, in fact, that was discussed a couple of weeks ago by council to look at the alternative energy concept in public areas, on using public infrastructure. I'm not aware of any existing business in the community that's looking to expand with that in mind. There are a couple of opportunity sites, I would argue, on the north east side of town that could potentially take advantage of some of those incentives. But as you know, our community is pretty dense, and we're not like the traditional brown and greenfield master plan cities that have a lot of opportunity for large distribution related or light manufacturing related installations that would accommodate and benefit from those types of subsidies. We are pretty limited in where we can see that kind of reinvestment. That said, DHL did build out their office a bit. They've cemented, I think, their presence here in town off of north of Manhattan Beach Boulevard, but there's not a lot of that kind of new build opportunity in town. We're a very tight community. Yeah. Appreciate the thought, though.
Could you talk at all about the AES property and the Galleria and what our statuses are? And
Yeah, I could talk a little. AES a little trickier. That one I can't give you too much information on. I can give you what's clearly been posted in the press. The AES has initiated a foreclosure action on the prospective buyer of that site. That site, as this commission probably is aware, was initially purchased in 2019 by, I think, 11 LLCs in total. The primary LLC, which under its documentation apparently owns 21+%, 21.4, 21.3% of the property purchase. That's the particular LLC that's filed for bankruptcy. So that's in federal court now, going through its machinations. Obviously, AES is the prior owner. Was initiating foreclosure because they felt that the LLC, the tenants in common, weren't performing under the performance deed of trust for the purchase and sale, and that is in dispute. We are an interested party in that bankruptcy proceeding, so we're monitoring it and participating very, very carefully and actively as a community that is clearly concerned with the future of that site and how it's cleaned up, et cetera. So yes, that's in a bit of a legal morass, I guess.
no timeline on it, though.
No specific timeline. The bankruptcy process doesn't move all that swiftly. I think, if you just asked me to peg it, is there more information in the next several months? Sure. Is there resolution? Probably not, right? That's kind of how this thing seems to roll. On the South Bay Social District side, the Galleria, their permits have been submitted. Their plans have been largely approved. They're ready to go to build on the renovations associated with the mall, the interior renovations associated with the mall. They have their permits submitted for the new apartment units on the northeast side of the campus there along Hawthorne and Artesia. We're evaluating and plan checking those permit requests. That's moving along well. Their current stall is really due to construction financing. That market has gotten very tight. You all probably can speak to it better than I can. In the old days, mixed use commercial projects, you could go out to a construction lender and you basically showed them your plan. Hey, here's my leasing plan. These are the folks I'm talking to. So-and-so has told me they're in. It was pretty loose. If you had a good concept, you could probably get a loan. Not the case these days. When it comes to retail, commercial campuses, lenders, construction lenders want not just LOIs, they want agreements. And they want agreements for roughly 50% of the square footage that's being renovated.
Pardon me for interrupting, but has that gotten tougher since Silicon Valley Bank and the bank failures?
It was tougher even before that, but it's even gotten a little bit tougher since then, and the numbers continue to go up. The cost of funds has gone up significantly. I think last I heard they're at potentially 9% now on a construction loan. But that requirement was already building pre Silicon Valley Bank. The reason for that, I think, in part, is because the commercial market has changed, right? Office has gone in the tank. Retail has largely gone in the tank, unless it's the right mix. So I think financiers just got a lot tighter about what they wanted to see before they would lend. So they are out there, they're working hard. They've made progress towards the 50% threshold. They're not quite there yet, but they are working very hard, and they remain optimistic. They have told me that, but for the housing component of this project, they probably wouldn't be able to get it financed. And they very well, I will just leave it at it. The housing is helping provide some comfort to the lenders. They need more of that, ideally, to bring this home from a lending standpoint.
But they're still working on getting financing.
They are, very, very much so. And ironically, the owner is now the richest. At least one of the firms that's a partner in all this is owned by, I always mispronounce the gentleman's name, but he's the richest man in the world now. Out of Europe, the LVMT brand, Bernard, I forget his last name. Renault, yeah. Arnold. Anyway, so he ultimately L. Catterton, which owns the property, the L is LVMT. Catterton is the LLC that does kind of the mixed use stuff in their market. But those individuals don't personally finance these projects. As you know, they form localized LLCs and they get lenders to take the risk. So,
follow-on question to the AES site. Where do we stand? Where does that site now stand with the regulatory authorities that want to keep it in business of generating electricity?
Well, that, I think, if there's any bright spot, that seems to be heading towards resolution. It does not appear. Now, this could always take strange twists and turns, but the state agencies involved with both making recommendations to the Energy Commission and the State Water Board, who's ultimately the gatekeeper for the once-through cooling permits that are needed to allow for a plant like this to continue to operate, seems like are aligning against the plan, are aligning with a plan that carves out and excludes Redondo from repowering. So it does appear, Redondo, from a power generating standpoint, will close at the end of this calendar year. That's the good news. What happens after that? Still a bit of a mystery. So any suggestions on the budget? I've always loved talking to you all about anything, but.
Well, I have to revisit something that we've talked about before. I noticed I think it was last week or the week before, Public Works purchased a new pickup truck to the tune of like $60,000. $15,000 of that was to get it configured for natural gas. And we've talked about things like the Vehicle Replacement Fund and how much we're spending on vehicles, and does it really make sense? I was not a participant in the city council discussion. I'm sure you've had those discussions. Can you share with us why it is that it makes sense to pay 30% more for a truck and for Public Works?
For a CNG truck, effectively. Yeah. I think as we start to evaluate green energy and whether or not CNG is truly viewed as a green energy solution, I think that's a fair question. I think we've done it to try to continue to comply with the AQMD targets and guidelines, and CNG still does fare better under, I think, AQMD's eyes than a traditional diesel or gasoline powered vehicle. So I know there are environmentalists out there that would probably disagree with that assertion, that would say CNG is not accretive to the environment. But that has kind of been our business model as it pertains to green fleet to date. We don't have a lot, fortunately, on the Public Works side, we don't have a lot of options beyond CNG to go with alternative fuels because there just isn't that out in the market yet. Eventually, I think it's going to be there. Electric trucks are coming. I think electric heavy vehicles are coming. Our transit department is obligated under the law to study full conversion by 2040 to a purely electric fleet. There's no alternative. I don't know where you can go out and buy a bus right now that's electric, but allegedly they're coming. So I think eventually Public Works will have that option. I don't disagree. I sometimes wonder, is that really the right environmental choice for us? But right now we're so desperate for vehicles. I think we'd buy just about anything that's offered. I mean, we are in some cases 3 years behind on schedule recycling our vehicles because the market has stagnated on a delivery basis. And even when we've secured purchase orders, sometimes the manufacturer has pulled out and withdrawn. And that's been a real challenge for us. And you can start to see it. Our fleet is looking aged. If you look at our parks vehicles out there, our trucks, you start to see a little rusting and that stuff I haven't seen in our community for 15 years. I mean, we had a very, as you know, almost arguably a too robust a replacement cycle. But with the council actions a few years back to extend the life cycle of vehicles, coupled with what we're dealing with on a supply chain basis now, we're overdue in almost all vehicle categories.
I was looking at that and it just occurred to me that we had the conversation. The goal of becoming green, I think, is really good.
Yeah.
The moves that we're making to get there sometimes seem like they're a little premature. We're pulling the trigger before before we figured out where the gun's pointed.
Yeah, and I think the CNG's kind of been it's been the only move we've made in really almost the last 12 years. I mean,
Well, back when it first came up, we were talking about the move to EVs. And the question was, are we getting the right EVs? What does this vehicle do? What's it used for? Which one do we get? And that was the first time we had that conversation.
Yeah, and we're seeing a little bit of improvement there in our sedans, our code enforcement vehicles, and our pool cars, the smaller vehicles. We went to Priuses early on, and we're kind of now going to the kind of mixed hybrids now, where you got a little bit of electrical and then you got a little bit of gas. So we're doing better, I think, in that category, but that's really not where.
Right.
That's a fraction of our fleet.
Right.
We got 200 and whatever 10 pieces of equipment in our vehicle fleet. Most of that is heavy duty stuff. So, we got a ways to go there. I think we are due for a revisiting and a deeper dive into our fleet program, both on a life cycle basis as well as kind of what our true electric strategies are. We got more work to do there.
Just the right vehicle for the job at hand.
Yeah.
Having a vehicle, an EV, that's got a 300-mile range and it drives 8 miles a day. What are we doing?
Right. Does that make sense? Right. Yeah. And so we'll see. I think there's more. I think there's some time and energy. I think this commission would be good to weigh in on that and have Public Works here at some point and present. We talked about it. I think now with Wendy, a little continuity here. Those are the types of things we can agendize and really roll up our sleeves on.
My last question for you. You said that the proposed budget's going to be published in about a week.
Next Tuesday.
Will we receive that directly? Do we have to request it? Do we have to check out the city hall?
It'll be a link. It'll be a link, an online link. I'm sure Wendy or Doug can circulate to you the link. Okay. That'll be included in the staff report. It'll be published in the agenda packet, the link to the location this weekend. But like I said, the link's going to take you nowhere until Tuesday afternoon when the thing's ready to go. So this is a rare year where a Tuesday night council meeting coincides with the delivery of the budget. Typically it's a Sunday or a Monday and it just, pops up live and there you go. But yeah, you'll get it at the same time the council does. Or at least gain access to it. Whether or not you're going to take the time to read it, I'll leave that to each of you.
Oh, you know me. I sit down and read that thing cover to cover.
Just digest it, just inhale it. Yeah. Yeah. So, it'll be there. It's been a challenging budget calendar year, as you know. I mean, it's, the ACFR, and we still don't have an ACFR. I mean, I think you all know that. We basically had to do mid-year on a shoestring just to get it done. It was a good exercise, I think, particularly for Wendy, who, is.
Depends on perspective.
Yes, is getting, coming to terms with our own little secret sauce here for budgeting. But this year's been a tough one for a variety of reasons. Appreciate all your patience on it too. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Can I ask one more question going back to the gallery? It's not necessarily budget related, but kind of to the commentary you're talking about, as they're going to try to secure funding, if it wasn't but for the residential units, it'd be a much harder task. And you said maybe even more would be better. Is there consideration of them revising their plans and like adding units or?
Yeah, you might, well, not revising their plans. What you might, they're committed to what they've got plans in for. They're going to build that. That's their goal. What you might remember is when we were approving our housing element in the community, right? There's a series of residential overlay areas that are part of that element. The one in particular that was identified as an opportunity site for additional residential units was the balance of the Galleria site. You might recall when the project was first studied, when the Galleria was talking about net new commercial square footage and building new anchor tenants out by Hawthorne and continuing to maintain the million plus square feet that's already in the mall, they were looking at adding up to, I think, 700 housing units on the southwest portion of the property over by Kingsdale and 177th. That wasn't super well received by the community. It was a lot of massing at that location. So when it became clear, they studied that location. They did an EIR for, I think at the end of the day, maybe 650, 675 units at that site. As they heard the community feedback, recognized where the market was heading, they said, wait a minute, we don't need net new commercial square footage. There's just nobody to lease it. And we heard from the residents, we don't love that much residential on that side of the property. Why don't we move the residential to where we were looking at the retail? And that's what they did. And those changes were then memorialized. And I think it's a better plan. I think everybody's excited about that plan. But there's clearly still an opportunity based on, if you look at the southern parking lots, you look at that southwest portion of the site, there's room potentially for some additional residential. So the residential overlay that was approved in the housing element includes additional possibility of additional housing on the Galleria campus.
You know how many units that was?
I want to say it was at least 300, but I think it might even be more than that because the environmental document studied is significantly more than that. So I think that there's a possibility that at some point the Galleria will come back and say, we would really like to pursue more housing. And it probably
would they have to come back and get approval?
They would.
Yeah,
that would have to be entitled. Yeah, all that's entitled now is the 300 units that's on the northeast side. So they'd have to come back, go through the planning commission process, the city council, the whole thing. But from a lending perspective, I don't know. It's possible that it may be necessary for them. I don't know.
I get that. Thank you.
Yeah.
A non-budget question. As you know, as we're all aware, there's legislation passed by the state which puts in question the ability of the city to maintain zoning, single-family zoning in some areas. Has there been any activity to date with developers trying to put multi-unit properties in a single-family area?
Yeah, so you're referring to SB 9, which is a law that basically, turned R1, single-family residential zoning, into R1 plus. And Brandy could tell you if we've had anybody come in that's got a single-family residential unit on their site, and then it's said, hey, I want to go basically R2. I want to put 2 townhomes on it. Most of what I think we've seen is building through the accessory dwelling unit law, the ADUs, where people have the right under state law. We can't check it back to build a small, I forget the square footage, it's 800 square foot standalone unit that can be rented or used as a kind of a living quarters for a family member or the like. So we've got a lot of those in town. We've had dozens of ADUs constructed in the community, or at least designed to be constructed. Not 100% sure that we've had that many multi-unit on SF single-family residential lot proposals yet. I think it's been more the ADU stuff, but they may be coming, you know. And we have so many, you know, I've said this, we are the model for, I mean, states trying to create all this urban density, right? That's all these housing bills are really meant to create these new housing starts. We've already done it. Redondo is, I look at us as the model that state is trying to achieve, right? But the problem is they're asking us to now do more. We're already there.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on that. To the extent that the state's trying to get us to become more dense, and we're already more dense than other areas in the South Bay, how can we combat that? I mean, it doesn't make sense that the state would require that. Can we go back as a legal defense and say, look, bring these other cities up to the same level we are before you ask Redondo to become more dense?
Yeah, no, listen, you are preaching to the choir here. We have tried to make that point. We are party to a lot of the SB 9 lawsuit. We're challenging SB 9 at the state level. We are one of the leading cities in doing that. We have made the case to HCD, but what we are also very cautious to do is to comply with the law and make sure that we are doing what we believe is statutorily required. So we make that case every place we can. The state is using a blunt axe to try to address a surgical problem. And that's the challenge. They've got one size fits all kind of zoning law now, zoning rules and legislation, but no two communities are alike and how that affects them. And that's what we're so frustrated with. But, you know, that said, we have a certified housing element. We were successful in doing that. We've got 500 new housing units in some form of construction or design right now. Legato, 115 plus units or whatever it is coming online here in the next year. We've got the properties on 190th Street that are in construction and are rolling out. Obviously, South Bay Social District, we just talked about that. So we continue to be, I think, a model for the state, despite the fact that we're 11,000, roughly 500 residents per square mile in one of the densest communities in the state. I mean, it's just, it feels unfair, but the state, you know, they don't view it that way. They look at us as an affluent community that needs to do its additional fair share, even though we've done probably 4 times the fair share that most of our neighbors have done. So, however you feel about it, we will always comply with the law, but we've challenged it, I think, at every turn that we think is appropriate. We'll continue to do, what's required. As painful as that is. Any other
questions?
Quasi budget related conversation? Always a pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you.
Move to receive and file.
All right.
Or Doug, or any e-comments or anyone on Zoom? I doubt it.
There's no comments.
Okay, great.
So we'll be back before you here. I forget, certainly at your June meeting, we'll be here to talk about the proposed budget. I think we might have a meeting in advance of that, right?
Yes, May 30th is a public workshop.
Well, that'll be with the city council.
Yes,
right?
city council.
Yeah, the May 30th meeting will be a city council, but I'm thinking specifically with the commission. I know we'll have the June meeting.
June 8th, that's it. That's
Okay.
the time frame, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and I got to think about
That was the addition.
that was the addition. I'm thinking about the joint and then the joint public works meeting. Typically, we do that as well. All right, we'll see what the calendar looks like. So you may be contacted for an additional available meeting night if possible. We've got to think that through.
Great.
All right, well, look forward to our June conversation, if not beforehand. And, you all know how to find me if you have specific questions about the budget before then. I'm happy to talk to each of you. So,
Thank you.
all right.
Thanks.
Motion to receive and
Good to
file.
see you all.
A motion to receive and file.
Second.
Thank you, Mike.
Enjoy the rest of the meeting.
You too. Doug, can I get a roll call vote?
Sure. Commissioner Jesse? Commissioner Castle?
Aye.
Chair Marin?
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham?
Aye.
Commissioner Samples?
Aye.
Commissioner Sherbin?
Aye.
Great, moving to item K, member items and referrals to staff. Start to my left, Commissioner Justy, anything? No problem. Commissioner Castle?
Just if we can get an email from you, Doug, whenever he sends that out with the proposed budget or whatever that link is.
Sure.
If we
It's
do
on
that.
it'll be on the city's website, but I can send you the link.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Nothing for me. Commissioner Woodham?
Nothing, thanks.
Commissioner Samples? Mr. Sherman?
No, thank you.
Great. Close item K and move to adjourn. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great. All right, thank you very much.